Hello, and welcome to Philosophy Fools, a bi-weekly podcast where a young father and old bachelor talk about life, philosophy, and staying curious. This week, Nephew Josh and Uncle Greg finish our conversation about Seneca's On the Shortness of Life, and talk about distractions and preoccupations, how life doesn't follow the stories we tell ourselves, having a definite purpose, making decisions, and the concept of self-adoption. Hope that sounds good, because that's what we're doing.
Hi, I'm Josh, and we are Philosophy Fools, and with me today is...
Uncle Greg! Good morning, Josh!
Good morning. How's it going today?
Everything's going great. It's always a good day to get together with you and talk about whatever crazy stuff comes up. I love it.
Awesome. And just a quick reminder to everybody why we're doing this podcast. We are just here to explore philosophy just as normal people. We are going to take what we find in the text and try and relate them to our real lives. We hope that our talks here about the philosophers of old and new can maybe give some insight into your own lives. All right, so today is going to be, we're going to wrap up Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. Do you want to get us started there, Uncle Greg?
Absolutely. To give everybody a quick catch up on what we've been doing, we went through initially a broad response to what we thought about the text overall and sort of what we took from it for our personal lives and the types of sort of lessons it might bring us. Then last week, we started to delve into much more specific textual ideas that popped up during our readings. So we covered things like what leisure is, what exactly is the shortness of life, what it means to value time, what it means to waste time. And also, finally, last week, we were talking about the concept of deferring, which is just to put off till tomorrow, making decisions about the things that we can focus on today and what things we have to push off until tomorrow, and how to be comfortable with that. And so that leaves us today with a couple of extra specific topics that we pulled out of the text. And then after we talk about those, I think we should just do a quick wrap up on our overall impression of the experience of reading the text. And then we can talk about other stuff that we find fun. That sound good?
Sounds good to me. Let's get started.
Now, the first of the last two topics that I wanted us to talk about today was, and again, just to get them back into the context of the message of Seneca, it's the fairly simple idea that life is short if you waste time and life is long if you use it well. And so a lot of what he's talking about is all of the very specific ideas around what does it mean to either waste time or use time well. And that's where when I pulled out this notion of distractions and preoccupation, it's the thing I find really interesting from particularly from a modern perspective is how much we have to deal with when it comes to things like distractions and preoccupation. That Seneca would like for a man or a person to have a purpose in life and be well focused on that purpose. And so it would essentially be impossible to be distracted if you don't have a purpose. That's one thing, because the purpose is the thing that you're being distracted from. But the idea of preoccupation is just this, it's sort of like having a lot of browser tabs open simultaneously, where you might just be bouncing back and forth between different things. It could be a video, a music, an article, and you aren't giving anything your particular focus or attention, but you are just you're using time in a way that's very you're using time like you have forever, because what you're doing is kind of silly and you're just killing time for the most. And
I feel like today the distractions and preoccupations are so much more than they were even in his time. I mean, we can still get distracted and preoccupied in the same ways, but we are fighting against so much more, even in the past 50 or 100 years, just due to technology. And the fact that we have, I mean, in front of me, literally, I have 4 screens that I could watch TV, movies, computer, phone, anything right in front of me. And probably all that is definitely considered distraction. And most people are preoccupied by, by their phones almost all the time, without being able to put those down.
Right.
So that would be my first thought on this topic, is just how different Seneca's life is compared to how our lives are just over the past, 1,000 years or whatever.
And for me, the following that train of thought is the notion of how baked in to us is this idea of being distracted. Because how could you be distracted if all you had was a meadow and butterflies outside to take you off of your mission in life? And yet for Seneca, that obviously was a reality, that people back in the day easily got preoccupied. And so it's very human of us to almost, particularly in our modern age, we almost manufacture things to distract ourselves, like it's the aim unto itself is to be distracted.
Yeah, we value distraction and preoccupation over, like, what we probably categorize that in our heads as something that we should value, like, because most everything that gives that little dopamine hit is probably something that we're getting preoccupied by, and it's some kind of, like, not leisure as Seneca would define it, but maybe, the people who are acting in leisure, by what was the example that he said that that some men didn't even know that he was sitting down, and like that was his preoccupation, or his distraction, was just that he was so into that definition of leisure. But yeah, these days, I mean, it's almost impossible to not be preoccupied with things that you don't value. But on the other hand, I mean, if you create your own value system, so what is a preoccupation in your mind might not be a preoccupation in somebody else's mind. And so I guess you would have to consider that at the beginning and really define it for yourself. And then, so that would lead me to the question, like whose distraction is? Everyone distracted by the same kind of things, or are we all distracted by something different? Our own distractions a little bit different than each other's.
Well, I think that's true. One of the things that to get back to the core focus of what Seneca is talking about is this idea of purpose. Because you can't be distracted for the most part if there isn't a thing you're supposed to be focused on. I think that a lot of times in the modern context, people think of things like their work, their job, as the thing that they're being distracted from. Which, if the type of work that you're doing is sort of rich, rewarding, and like the thing that you would choose to do even if you weren't being paid to do it, then that becomes something about distraction in the context of where Seneca's coming from. Whereas a lot of people have jobs they couldn't care less about. They want to be distracted from their jobs because they don't like their job. Like it's like a huge ecosystem of, like, the job itself is a distraction, but because they haven't really made a decision about what their purpose is. And that's the thing, is you can't be distracted if you don't have a purpose from which to be distracted.
So would you say that most people don't define their purpose then, really?
Right. I honestly believe that the most, we, particularly in a modern context, I don't consider it to be exceptional to have a purpose in life, but I do think that that's only because so many people don't think about it. We sort of discussed early in this conversation about sort of these social mythologies of life being one sort of pre-written story of, I'm a kid, then I go to school, then I graduate, then I get a job, then I get married, then I have a kid, and then I work until I retire, and then I die. And so as long as you're somehow fulfilling one of those nuggets, then people think they have a purpose. They just aren't. And it's one of the reasons there's so much sort of anxiety that people possess, is because all of those things can be purposes. It's just you have to make them a purpose. You have to decide that they are your purpose. They aren't passively a purpose.
Right. And then if you have that purpose, then I mean, if we're talking in this distractions and preoccupations, then you can define those preoccupations and distractions well, and you can be mindful as to when these things are occurring, and if they are occurring too often, then you can kind of change your life revolved around it. And in the same way, if you don't define your purpose, I mean, so you have to, so everyone is walking around with this predetermined purpose almost, and if they're not defining it, then they don't realize, then they're just kind of walking almost aimlessly, and they probably question themselves a lot, or I would question myself a lot, like saying like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, etc., or what is the meaning of life? Like people are always asking that question. We talked about that a little bit in the first discussion about this. But I think clearly defining that purpose could at least help you be mindful about what you're doing, and really make sure everything is focused, or at least you're making the decision about your distractions.
Right. And that's one of the things you just reminded me of, is that's the reason that Seneca places so much emphasis on an awareness of death and of your own impending death, is that you would know it's in the moment of death. If you were in the midst of one of these distractions or preoccupations, you might feel sort of a momentary existential dread, because it's like at that moment you're being confronted with the fact that you are in fact just living a distracted and preoccupied life, and then you're killed by the bus or whatever. And I think that what Seneca thinks you should, that you're better off doing, is if you are living a life where you've made decisions, you are executing or deeply engaged in those decisions, when that moment of death arrives, that you will be at a certain level of peace, because you will know sincerely that there's really nothing more you could be doing. That you
especially as long as you're living in the present, on your purpose path that you've defined.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the downside of distraction and preoccupation, is that you, at least subconsciously, are always aware that you're not sort of, that you're wasting time, that you are wasting your life by being distracted.
One of his quotes that I think you wrote down was, following no fixed aim, shifting and inconsistent and dissatisfied, are plunged by their fickleness into plans that are ever new. So I mean, that I was thinking about that, because in my life, like how often would I get focused on one thing, but only for a short period of time? So this one kind of confused, this like little sentence kind of confused me a little bit, because for me, I want to discover as much as I can, and so I want to try things, and so I want to, but if I do something for a few months and I don't find any value in it, or I'm not being satisfied from it, I'm going to stop doing that. So I guess my question for you, like to maybe help me explain this to me a little bit more, is like, is it, so I want to create my purpose, but then I want to try as much as I can to get to that purpose, or I'm not really trying to get anywhere, but just to try and navigate kind of towards that purpose. But I still think that trying all these new little things is a good thing. And I feel like he's saying here that maybe trying all these little things might not be a good thing. So what do you think about that?
I don't think that's exactly where he's driving. I think what he's trying to get at is our human tendency to be a dilettante. Because it's one thing to say, like, hey, I want to learn about podcasts. Like right now, we're engaged in an exercise of trying to discover whether or not podcasting is a good thing for us to focus our time on. And that is a thing that if we arrive at a point where we say, hey, you know what, this just isn't we aren't able to get it to a point of quality, or we aren't enjoying the process, but that we prosecuted the exploration of podcasting to its logical conclusion, or it becomes a thing that what we incorporate into our lives as a regular part of our lives. That's very different from what I think he's driving at, which is this idea of I think using the word shifting and inconsistent is a good example of something where what he's really talking about is the kind of people who will be like, hey, you know what, I'm going to get into hang gliding, and then they spend like a half a week on hang gliding, but that's by no means enough to truly explore hang gliding, nor is it really enough to even indicate a real interest, because they get distracted later and become like, I want to ride mopeds for the rest of the week. That's a little different, because you aren't pursuing the thing. You're just being a dilettante and kind of vaguely exposing yourself to a thing and then moving on to some other thing.
So if like in the hang gliding instance, if before I wanted to take up hang gliding, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do hang gliding for 3 weeks, and the week 1 I want to learn this, week 2 I want to learn this, week 3 I want to learn this. And so like we talked about last episode, we're making that decision. So I mean, as long as you're making that decision and defining it, then I mean then that is a good life, or an occupied life, I guess, in this sense, we would say.
Yeah, and even
not distracted.
Something as simple as and I use this example of television watching a lot, because it's, if you were to record somebody from the outside, if you were to videotape a person watching television, somebody who has consciously thought 2 days ago that they really wanted to watch the Maltese Falcon on Thursday night at 8, that person looks like they're having the exact same experience as somebody who just turned on a television and is simply being driven forward in the television watching by how much like how many things happen, like what's colorful, what makes me laugh, what makes me sad, what makes me comfortable because I've seen it before. Like that's a very passive experience of watching television versus someone who's made a very conscious decision to spend 2 hours to enjoy a specific type of entertainment that they've really been looking forward to. And it's that qualitative difference. I think that just even looking at that phrase by Seneca, like you are plunged by your fickleness into plans that are ever new. That means that they are just, because you can't make up your mind, there's always something new. You're being fickle. You're just being a person that's like, oh, it's the next thing. Oh, it's the next thing. Oh, I love these new shoes. Oh, I love this new car. It's a recipe for not being fully engaged in your life. And I think that's the point that he's driving towards, is that in his thinking, life is short. The only way to make life worth living is to use your life in a way that's extremely valuable to you. And in using it, you need to be mindful of being taken off of that purposeful use and getting into these things of distractions and preoccupations. It's frankly, you and I both know, we've worked in gyms before, and we've seen the difference of somebody who comes in and says, you know what, I really want to, I'm tired of being a person who I don't know, it just isn't very physical. So I'm going to dedicate myself. I'm going to be here at least 4 days a week, and I'm going to put in the work and the effort and the focus to see what I can do with my body, versus somebody who comes in and goes, I saw the ad on the TV. I wanted to join up and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Usually it's a couple months of convincing them, but there's always the difference in the person that comes with the plan, who's ready and doesn't need to be convinced about anything. That's for sure.
Or just has no plan, or just simply has that profound intention and will do whatever it takes to move themselves along the path. And even somebody like people like you and I, we both have a lot of knowledge about this type of stuff. It's easy. I can't talk for you, but I know for me, it's super easy to slide off the horse and just be wallow in a an ocean of donuts and be like, oh, this is so great, even though I know I'd be better off in the gym.
Yeah, the whole story on the shortness of life, and especially the preoccupations, is a perfect, like almost everything we talk about is a perfect, it's almost the same as working out or in the gym or the pursuit of fitness. Just because in this sense, like like you said, you can always swim. I know donuts are awesome for sure, but like any kind of chocolate or cake, cake or anything like that that comes up, it's very easy to get persuaded by those. And even though that's just a small example, but I mean that preoccupation into sugar gluttony or whatever is definitely real. And if you're realizing that, and you'll be successful in fitness or making yourself healthy. So I guess you just have to be occupied with the main goal.
Well, and just you brought something up just then that it just triggered me, which is that it's a very interesting turns of phrase that we as people use, which is things like the donut made me eat it, and that it's the external stimulus that's sort of making us do things. And what Seneca is really saying is that no, the most important thing is that your internal motivation affects the outside universe. The outside universe doesn't affect your internal motivation. And that's
true.
Yeah. So that's kind of like where he's coming from. And it's so easy, but and that's the reason I think he went to the trouble of writing it down, because we all just be like, oh, those donuts look so good. They made me do it.
Well, Seneca didn't have to fight with like highly processed, engineered donuts that came from a factory with hundreds of people testing it and adding in different amounts of sugars and salts to make us want more at every minute of the day. So
I think Seneca had his fill with people bringing wine around to him and saying like, hey, let's get going.
Yeah, that's true. I guess not much more to do in that day.
We've never lived like human beings have never lived in a temptation-free environment, because we instantaneously manufacture temptation as soon as we stop being a hunter-gatherer.
Yeah,
because we have time
very
to
true.
and think about stuff like, well, hey, if we're thinking, I think I want to be distracted. So I bet that there's plenty of eaten moldy toadstools and everything else, just anything to get off of the fact that you had things to do.
Yep. I guess anytime you're going to figure out something to not do what you need to do.
But to sort of finish off that topic of distractions and preoccupations, I think broadly speaking, what Seneca is driving at is that once you as a person are well aware of your death and your mortality, that the continuous presence of that is the thing that would make you want to not be distracted, because you're saying to yourself, you know what? Oh my God, I'm going to die. Like, even if I live the longest life a human being has ever lived, it's still a drop in the bucket compared to cosmic time, or even human time. If you think of all the millions and millions of people that we'll never know because they lived a full long life, but they didn't make it through history. And the gamble is that we're that same person. So that really means that we need to make the best life we possibly can for ourselves and the people, and to help the people we love too, because that's another big part of it, is that we're not just isolated individuals, but if we can bring positive kind of energy, like, and there is nothing more positive than saying, you know what, not only can I make decisions, I can make decisions and I can stick to them. And that's a thing that is a power that can be given over to other people who maybe don't believe in a world where they can make decisions and stick to them. And that's a thing that it's one of the reasons I really like getting together with you and us doing these talks in kind of a public way, is that if you can just kick one person over that line from thinking that there's really nothing that they can do about their lives and there's nothing that they can do to affect anything, those are the people that tend to become destructive. It's only people who know that they can make decisions and that decisions are useful and vital that even bother to be constructive or generative.
Well, that kind of leads us on to the final topic we wanted to discuss, right, on self-adoption, where Seneca says stuff like, we are in the habit of saying that it was not our power to choose the parents who were allotted to us, that they were given to us by chance. Is similar to what you were just, I mean, almost everything that I mean, that's great because it really is the basis of like philosophy, and it's really a great way to think about life. But this one, I mean, like you were saying, the power to choose. I mean, he was even talking about that, like if you were born back in the day, if you were born into a certain family or whatever, I mean, you could then choose, who you need to choose who you want to be. I mean, even back in the day, I'm sure this is a little bit wrong context, but I'm sure there was like peasants and serfs, different classes back then. And then you can basically choose what you want to be. You don't have to stay in that same class your whole entire life. I mean, that's the ultimate choice in itself. Is not I mean, some people get stuck in a certain family or whatever, and they don't think that they can change because that's all they've ever known. But really, that's a huge power to choose, is to choosing your life different than what your parents were, different than your class.
And deeper still than that is not so much about class, or like essentially like that's on a gradient scale. That's absolutely a case of like not feeling like you're trapped by the society that you're in. And I think that at a more base level, and I don't know if you've had this experience in life, but I mean, over time I've interacted with a lot of people who aren't living great lives, people who for whatever reason are depressed or anxious or fearful. They invariably, something will come up about the parent. It'll be like, like essentially like a 45 or 50-year-old person who is still dominated by the fact that their parents suck. And I think a lot of times people will say like, oh wait, they will dismiss the notion of the terrible parent and that the person just needs to shake it off. But that, I think what Seneca is basically saying is that parenting is a thing that exists for as long as the child-parent relationship still exists. So when you're a kid and your parents sort of hold dominion over you, there's nothing you can do about that. That is just the reality of your life. And what I think that Seneca is driving towards here is the idea that, let's say, you've struck out into life and now you're away from your parent. And some people will say like, well, I can't do that because I don't have enough self-confidence to do that. And it's because my parents always told me I was stupid. And that is a very true kind of cycle that people get themselves into. What Seneca is basically trying to say is, look, there's a fact to parenting, and that is that you get born, and if you're lucky enough, your parents don't kill you instantaneously upon arrival. And even if they're trying to be unpleasant to you, which many people are because they're just unprepared to be parents or even have the self-awareness to understand that being a parent is different than being just a regular person without a child. But that once the separation occurs, I think what Seneca is trying to drive towards is this idea that once that relationship is physically severed, that you can take it even further and create inside of yourself your own parent. You can adopt yourself to say like, oh, I see that my parents told me I was stupid. And then me as my new parent is going to say, no, you're not stupid. I am now giving you the freedom to live a life where me as your newly adopted parent is going to accept you and see you for who you truly are. And that self-adoption process is just a sense of saying, like, if you always wanted to be a musician and your parents always told you couldn't be a musician, that once the parent-child relationship is severed, and I mean that from the standpoint of dependence, like I need food from my parents to live, like that relationship is extremely physical and real. And it's when it becomes separate where you are the one generating the food for yourself and you are providing shelter for yourself, that in that environment, if you have a negative relationship to the past with the parenting you've already received, that you can in essence create the new parent inside of yourself and parent yourself to adopt yourself to so that you can move forward from that negative beginning. And I always thought that was a very powerful observation by Seneca, given that he so wildly predates our modern notions of psychology and psychiatry, which are very much many parts of them surround early formation of people and they're those early most powerful relationships of parent to child.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the 7 habits of highly effective people, like when you're moving through the stages of life where you go from like being codependent to independent to interdependent. Like I would say that probably going from codependent to independent would be like the first step in that self-adoption, where you're starting to kind of parent yourself, get rid of it, because it's hard. I mean, if you're changing maybe 20 to 30 years of your life, you've always thought, well, really, like the first 14 years of your life, like your parents are everything. Like your parents are God to you, or I have that's a bad
But
term
no,
to
I
say
mean
in this,
it
but
is. I mean they created you. They are God to you.
yeah, and I mean everything that they say, you really believe what they're saying. And then, in your teenage years, you really start to kind of realize this, and but it's hard to it's even hard to move from being codependent to independent in this case, because you're still trying to figure that out. I mean, you think that you're independent, but I don't even think you really know what that means yet. So maybe that's that first part of just trying to adopt, really trying to, if in your framework here, where you're saying that if I'm switching from a parent-child relationship to basically parenting myself, then it's like you have to. It's like that's extremely hard to do, and can take 5 or 10 years, I think, to just switch that over in your mind.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
no, and I think that it's something you just said just triggered this in my mind is approval, this concept of approval, because one of the things that we'll see in our development as adolescents is moving from a state where all the approval we seek is from our parents, and it starts to go over to a universe where we try to seek approval from our peer group, and that sets up a pattern of approval seeking. And again, back to what Seneca's driving towards is that it's your own approval that you need to be earning, and that when you're in that kind of headspace of adopting, of self-adopting, is this notion of approval and disapproval being internal and not being external.
Yeah, when I first saw this, the self adoption, that the as a topic that you kind of wrote down, I didn't understand it fully, but after you kind of explained this to me, this is actually super important thing to happen. Like going from taking other, like you just said, taking other people's approvals. I mean, how many of us are always seeking other people's approvals without even realizing it? And I guess this just goes back to another thing, just being aware and having your purpose, having your hierarchy, like basically everything that we've been talking about over the past few weeks. I mean, it's hard to even create a proper one without adopting yourself from your parents, and really taking just full responsibility of your life. I mean, this is definitely a super important topic to try and get a hold of. I mean, because even at work these days, how many people go to work and are always, want to get approval by their boss? So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this self adoption, I mean, do you think it could be in all our relationships? Like it's not like we just turn, like just in our parents and ourselves. Like if we switch that relationship, I mean, to take self-adoption into all parts of life, I mean, it's like you really have to just take control of your life. I mean, would you think that it's something that you'd have to do in different parts of your life, and not just the parent-child relationship, like your boss relationship or relationships with your friends and all that?
Absolutely. I think that the what that reminds me is that when you talk about self-adoption, as I understand how he's driving towards this, is of the entire you, of all of you, in the same way that when you're dealing with your parents, particularly like when you look at your young son Charles as he turns one, you see all of Charles and that you provide for all of Charles. When you start to move into universes like work, they are always seeing just a slice of you. They're seeing sort of your competence as a network administrator. And if for some reason you're incompetent as a network administrator, oftentimes people, because they think that that all of them is being seen, that they see that all of them is being rejected when somebody says, you're a terrible network administrator. And and so the self-adoption is for all of you. It's so that you can enter a real world, like a work world, and realize that there might be a part of you that's not as good as it could be. But that's very different than saying that if I'm deficient in this one work activity, does that make me entirely useless? No, of course not. But right. But if you're looking for approval, like broadly speaking, like if you approve of my work, that means you approve of me as a person. It's that really bad relationship, and it's something that took me a long time to realize, but I always told my coworkers, and particularly people who are subordinate, that in many ways work is theater. It's where we pretend that this is all of us and that it's not where it really is all of us. And that's where I think it's so important to have the concept of self-adoption, is to say that somebody should be in charge of how the things you value, how you see yourself as valuable, and that the only person you can trust in that role is you. Now, and that's assuming that you've got good, healthy, that you're not a narcissist, that you're not, somehow just a psychotic. But broadly speaking, if you're a person who has the ability to be self-reflective and sort of see your impact in the world around you, then self-adoption is this hugely positive thing, because what it does is it removes the outside influences. Even if you have a great relationship with your parents, even if your parents are awesome people, they may have the most classic example of disconnect is where somebody might have a passion for something like the arts, but their parents are very much see that as being a dangerous path to take. And because they love their children so much, they would really prefer that they do something like being a doctor or a banker or something. And so that isn't a negative impulse, but in order to avoid the idea of resenting that kind of disconnect, by self-parenting, what you're essentially doing is in a long, drawn out way, you're giving your parents permission to not have to worry about you anymore, because somebody who's just as interested in your well-being, i.e. you, is taking the role of having to deal with all of those tough decisions. And I've always thought that's probably, not being a parent, this is a thing that I've seen from the outside, but that one of the paradoxes of being a good parent is that you raise your children not to need you. And that's tough, because they need you so much when they're young.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, I was just thinking about myself and parenting, and how I have at least 17 more years of looking after these kids until they're out of the house. So lots to think about here for me. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about with self-adoption?
No, I think obviously, I think that we stumbled upon the fact that that's a really, really big topic that could probably be the focus of a lot of conversation for a long time. But yeah, let's go ahead and we'll move on, because we're running out of time ourselves today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so that pretty much concludes our discussion on shortness of life. So, I just wanted to kind of give my final thoughts on the shortness of life, and we can always return to this, because I think this book is super important, or the story or essay, however you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I like is that everything kind of goes together. Like, our conversation today about self-adoption, I mean, really that compared to, what is the actual shortness of life? Like we have a short time to live, but we waste a lot of it. I mean, if without adopting yourself as taking full responsibility of your life, it's hard to create the hierarchy for your life. And then if you don't create a hierarchy for your life, then every single day you don't know if you're wasting your life, or if you're actually doing something valuable with your time. I mean, everything is just, and the choice of deferment that we talked about, are you waiting too long for things, or are you're doing what you're meant to be doing in your definition at the right time? I mean, there's so much that I think I've gotten out of on the shortness of life. I've probably gone through the text maybe 10 or 20 times now. But it's just good to I try and listen to it at least once a week on my way to work, to just kind of be reminded of these things, because I really do think, at the beginning of this, you said that you thought that it was really the basis of philosophy going forward. And after our discussions, I definitely agree that these are some of the base layers for setting up a good life, however you define that. And I think this gives you a good framework for defining that.
Absolutely, and I think that I have exactly the same kind of response to that, which is that the thing about On the Shortness of Life is that it's such an easy text to get through just from beginning to end, because that can be a real barrier for a lot of people. Is just a sense of like they're entering into something that's just going to take forever, or it's just going to be impossible to get through. Whereas it's just a really good example of a very straightforward meditation on something that everybody can understand. Everybody has a life. Everybody's going to have a life that ends at some point, and these are all this very short text is a real gives you the ability to quickly go through your own inventory of what's happening in your life. So I think it's a great thing that, and it changes every time you read it, because you're always living a different life than the last time you read it.
Absolutely. So that's on the Seneca, or On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. So what are we going to get into next time?
Well, I've been, as we discussed a little bit earlier, I thought that maybe a good thing for us to do is just kind of continue to roll on through a little bit of the Stoic thinking, just so that we can get the flavor of this from another perspective. So I thought we could hop on to Marcus Aurelius's on meditation, and that what we can do is just maybe to bite off chapter 1, which is very short, and just see what comes from that. And I'll be reading Penguin Classics version of Meditations, and that'll give us a sort of a leaping off point for Stoicism from a different point of view.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. I know it's been a while. You recommended Meditations to me a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, and so it's been about a year since I will probably listen to it, and I don't have exactly which one I'm going to be listening to, but
Okay.
That's usually how I am able to fit stories in throughout the day, because I commute so much and everything. So that's just probably better for me. But I will update that on our next episode. But yeah, that sounds like a good plan to me.
Sounds good. Well, before we say bye, any kind of fun family stuff? I was able to come out and enjoy a birthday celebration with Adeline Jean.
Yep. So last week, Adeline's 4th birthday party was a pretty good success. We had the slip and slide outside, and lots of pizza and little kids. And yeah, thanks for coming out. And we had a good amount of family out there too. And yeah, it was a good day. And Adeline is love it. She got a park that I think you helped with, and my parents all bought this park, and she absolutely loves it. We've had kids over probably 3 or 4 nights over the past week that just run around on it's not even a huge park or anything, but the kids just love that little go up and down, and it's
It
and
is
so
great.
today is my son's first birthday. Yeah, exactly. It's awesome.
Yeah, that is great. And although, one thing I learned from that was that as an older person, I realized I don't live very close to the ground anymore. And when I do try to live very close to the ground, it's problematic. And it's been a long time since I had a small child jump on my stomach. And I'm here to tell you, that's a rude awakening. So I need to start doing more core work and watch out for these elbow slamming children that I am unfamiliar with.
Yeah, did you get beat up by a couple kids last week?
Oh, they were just walking on me like I was a doormat heading into the house. It was just I was like, wait, kid, I'm a human. I'm a human being person.
Yeah, it's pretty much every day of my life.
I can dig it. Well, and how about entertainment stuff? Did you pick up anything new this week that was fun?
Well, so this week, Amber and I started watching The Nevers on HBO Max. And it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's cool. It's you don't really see too many. I guess what do you want to call them? Mutants, or they call it the touched, I think, in that show is what they call them.
Yeah.
But people with power, people with superhuman abilities, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see that in the past very often, so I think that's kind of a cool premise, but it's just so. I mean, I'm not super excited about it, but it's a cool show to watch.
It takes a while to get rolling, and because of COVID, there's sort of a weird reality that it's only a 6-episode season. So if you give it the first 6 episodes, you can really kick back and kind of know pretty much if you like it or not, because the final episode really does a lot to tweak your perspective of what's happening, and whether you like that tweak or not, I think would tell you whether you're going to wait to catch up with it when it comes back.
Oh, very cool. We're 3 episodes in now, so we have a few more to go, but we'll definitely stick to it till the end. So how about you? Anything new on the entertainment?
Well, I think I mentioned this to you, and I'm not very proud of the fact of this, but I've been watching Banshee, which I guess is an old Cinemax show that just showed up on HBO Max, and it's just insanely violent, sexual, and lurid. It's just, but the more I started to get into it, the more I started to realize that it is physical storytelling. That it's the reason they lean so much into all of this is that they're a lot less concerned about the script, like the words coming out of people's mouths, than just telling the story visually in a way that's extremely kinetic. I watched. I'm in the 3rd season of 4 seasons right now, because it ended with a shorter last season, and it struck me that I was almost having a heart attack during this one episode. And for to be 3 seasons into a show and still have it being on this upward trajectory of its effectiveness in storytelling has really been very interesting, because it starts at 11 and then continues to go up. And I'm like, man, these people they're out of control.
It's usually the opposite too in most shows, right? Usually around season 2 or 3, sometimes things get a little weird, but that's awesome that you're 3 seasons in and it's still exciting.
Oh my God. I straight up, I'm not kidding about the heart attack thing. I was literally, my heart was pounding. I was like, what is happening? I haven't had a television program make my heart pound since I was 12.
That's awesome, then.
It's interesting stuff, but that'll be over soon. And we're going back to what Seneca talks about, distraction. Banshee has become a distraction in my life, and I need to put the kibosh on that and get back to more of my purpose.
Awesome. Sounds good to me.
Sweet. Okay, then. Well, I guess that does it for this week. And anything else before we wrap up?
Nope. I guess we are just the Philosophy Fools. Thanks for watching today. And Uncle Greg, it was good talking to you as always.
Absolutely. Same here, pal. And I guess we're seeing each other this afternoon too. So I look forward to seeing you guys in just a little bit.
All right. See you in a few hours. Talk to you later. See you guys.
Take care. Hey folks, Uncle Greg here. Just wanted to thank you again for listening, and be sure to join us next time when we kick off our discussion of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, with some background on Stoicism and strategies for making it a little easier to read. As always, a special thanks to Ted Onulak and Exit 10 for our music. You can check them out at exit10band.com. That's EXIT10BAND.com.